everyone about maybe about 10 seconds more. That's okay.
I'm not sure if anyone is taking a look at the polling right now. Can you guys see it?
Yes, I see the scoring
cool.
coming up. Yeah.
All right, cool. Just confirming.
All right. So just for everybody's view, I just want to share the findings. Yes, interesting. We've got amongst us about 21% using Jira, about 32% Trello. Nice project sending out. Planner, Asana, and some of the others. So excellent. So we've got a very diverse set of crowd here, and that's nice. Get going now. So just a quick rundown of the agenda. We will cover, broadly speaking, a number of areas from Agile towards Agile tools, global trends, some use cases, overview of Trello and Jira, followed by Agile project management as a whole, the bits and pieces, and we will wrap up with Trello and Jira demonstration. Let's start with the first thing first, the question, the big question, right? Why Agile? And what you see here is the most recent and the largest Agile adoption report globally published this year. As you can see from the chart, there are many reasons why organizations adopt Agile. From managing change to increase in productivity, IT business alignment, we've got quality aspects coming in, aligning end product with business needs. Now, what does this mean to us? I mean, that's the big question, right? The survey is one thing, but what does it mean to us? Now, let me put it this way. Now, there are loads of definitions you will see about Agile. I think you just have to Google up and you will see loads of it. And I won't get into those textbook definitions. Now, to me, Agile should achieve primarily three significant outcomes. Firstly, I would say improvement in teams' morale. That's achieved by having self-organizing and empowered teams. Secondly, you have empowerment, and that's productivity achieved through that. And you talk about teams doing improved velocity. That's really possible when teams actually are empowered, because you have that morale coming in, then you're empowered and you start looking at productivity coming in next. And last but not least is the aspect of delighting customers. I think if that's not in the equation, that something is not right. Now, if there's an order to things, I would say start with the morale bit, right? And look at then how that slowly and surely starts to improve productivity. And obviously that naturally will flow through by delighting customers. Now, what I see most organizations getting into, they're very excited to get into the Agile space, but some of them are failing to understand the first bit. You may be so excited with the word sprint, let's have retrospective, let's have all the Scrum Masters coming in together. But I think what's fundamentally important and required is the team bit, right? It's the people side of things. And that's a real distinguishing factor. Now, just to share, the organizations that I talk to are in various stages. Now, I would say some of them are doing Agile and some of them are in the being stage. And what most aspire to be is in the space of the Agile way of working. And it is only when we adopt the Agile way of working will there be the mindset change that's happening gradually. And what I talked about earlier, the team morale and productivity improvements and delighting customers will slowly start to come in, right? So it's a gradual process that obviously needs time and mentoring and coaching over a period of time. Now let's take a quick look at closely to the subject of what we are here today for, to understand mainstream Agile project management tools, and in particular Jira and Trello. Now, as you can see from this slide, there are loads of such tools out there, and some of you may be familiar with some of them. Some tools you may have used. So let's look at the statistics, right? Let's try and understand the statistics. Now, let me draw your attention to the popularity of various agile tools in the market today, as you can see here. Obviously, high up is Atlassian Jira, and Atlassian being the company that owns Jira, and obviously many other project management tools going down the pecking order. I'm sure you've used many of these tools. Now, you might be asking this question, Jira, sorry, for that matter, Trello, as a matter of fact, is not on the list, right? And that's really because Trello was not built as a purpose-built agile tool per se, but it has a broad use cases, so that it's not listed as one. Now, let me move on and talk about the use cases. There are quite a few things that we typically do in an agile project, right? From a combination of matrices and communication, planning, and so on. Surely agile tools are not used all the time, as you can see from this table. So I just want to set the context here so that we are clear as to what agile tools in particular can assist and do and what it cannot do. So when you see a no on the table, so for example, principles, you can't quite use a tool to achieve that, right? So that has to be in the mindset, ingrained in someone. The tool can't help you there. But when it comes to practices, yes, some practices you can use tools to support you, but some practices you can't. For example, daily stand-up, you really have to do that, right? You really can't get a tool to do that for you. Now, so we also need to understand one thing, that agile tools are not a solution in itself, right? You know, as a practitioner, I need to be conscious that agile tools merely complement. This should not come as a surprise to most of you. And if you remember the Agile Manifesto that says individual interaction and engagement is more important over excessive use of tools. So that's quite clear in Agile. But I must add one other thing, right? The use of such tools are becoming more popular now, even more so with the current lockdown, MCO, challenges we face, the pandemic. Now, I have, in the course of my engagement with many project teams, I have observed how people have configured it well and how they have not configured those tools well. So in cases where they have not configured the tool well, the tool have not served their interest. So if you've configured those tools well, I would say agile tools will go a long way to improve loads of things, your communication, your visibility of work, your planning, your engagement level, and so on. So that's really what agile tools do for us. And this is why we need them. So a quick overview. What is Jira? To understand that from that perspective of things. Well, I would say it's a single tool that helps you in your planning, tracking, or releasing your deliverables. And when I say planning, you're talking about your sprint planning. You're creating your user stories, your task issues, assigning them to members with a few clicks. Tracking becomes very, very useful. And you're knowing the updates of status in real-time reports churned out at every step of the way. You've got reports like burn down charts, sprint report, epic report, and so on. And the best part of all, I think, is the ability to customize Jira's amazing workflow to suit your specific organization needs. So that's really what, those are some of the things I like Jira all about. So yes, it's adopted fairly widely across the globe. Now let's look at Trello. Right, Trello is a web-based. It's, if you ask me, it's a simpler version of what Jira is doing. It has some very good features. The part I like Trello most is its simplicity and its intuitiveness. Of course, Jira in comparison is a lot more powerful, but can be a bit complicated at times. But from an administration point of view, you need that. You need that power behind the scene to manage loads of things. For example, in Jira, when you can actually allow who to move what, the cart that goes from to do and done and doing and so on. You can actually manage all of that really very well. But Trello is nice. It's fun. It's quick to get it up and start it. So that's nice. We'll have a look at them later. But let's understand Agile project management, the big picture, right? I mean, before we get into the discussion, right? We're getting closer to the heart of the discussion. Now, I just want to paint this big picture to all of us today so that we understand the demo that comes after this. I'm just trying to make the correlation obvious. So when we start an Agile project, we typically begin with a product vision. Now, a product vision is nothing but a guiding light. It's really the what we're trying to achieve, right? The high level what we're trying to achieve, that high level picture of the whole outcome, if you may like. And thereafter comes the product vision. Now it is set out for us to crystallize the vision, which can be very abstract, into some high level milestones, if you like. And this becomes very useful because the development team, who may not be able to articulate the vision so well, can now see the details a bit clearer with the product roadmap. It's not meant to be so detailed with actual dates, but just broad timelines and broad goals and outcomes, so to speak. And what happens after the product roadmap is the product backlog, right? It consists of the actual work that we are doing, and that's ordered, it's prioritized in this document called the product backlog. Now, what really happens in the backlog typically is we break it down into little chunks. As you can see on the slide, this little chunk of work, usually in 2 weeks, we call them sprints, right? So sprints are nothing but broken down chunks of work done in 2-week intervals, usually. Some teams I know they go over 3 weeks or 4 weeks, but usually it's 2 weeks. So that sort of sets the big picture, right? You've got the vision, the broad overview of things, and then you've got the roadmap and the backlog, and then the details going into the sprint. Now let's try and see what a roadmap is. A roadmap typically looks like this. And this is in fact an actual project I'm involved in. I will show you that later on when we talk about Jira. A roadmap is not to be confused with the Gantt chart. Unlike a Gantt chart, roadmap presents high-level milestones sufficient to guide the development team. And since these milestones in the roadmap have already been communicated with the client, the development team can comfortably start working, given that they know what they're doing has already been aligned with the client, because these discussions has already been undertaken earlier on. So the roadmap is really a very good guiding document with the customer centricity in mind and allowing the team to adopt that similar high-level milestones for them to articulate their work subsequently. So coming back to the big picture, let me reiterate the thing, what we discussed. We have the product vision, we've got the roadmap, which is the details now. The backlog has got the full details, and you have the sprints, the chunks of work. And what you have within a sprint, what goes inside a sprint, they are nothing but requirements, right? What are requirements? Requirements are actual work. We call it project activities, right? It can be in Agile, we call it user stories. We can be risk element, risk mitigation activities. It could be documentation, approval, meetings. If you have vendor management activities, you have that as well. You've got your testing work. All of those go into the sprint, right? So your requirements is really a big word that actually means anything and everything you do as part of the project to create the product. The product is the outcome. So keeping that in mind, let's revisit the backlog a bit again, right? And we have the sprints now. You know what the sprints, they're nothing but little 2-week chunks. And you now know the requirements that goes in each sprint. And remember, right, the sprints are ordered in priority. So what actually is done in sprint 1 is usually higher in the order of priority and value to the customer compared to what's done in sprint 2. So that's also important to understand. And really how these requirements translate to Jira and Trello is what I've shown here in the slide. And if you look at the slide, Jira calls them issues. So anything under the sun is called an issue. But an issue may be a type of risk, if it's a risk requirement. An issue could be a type of a task, which is a task. Task is a smaller work. A story is a bigger work. You have a bug sometimes that can also be an issue. An epic is a slightly larger piece of chunk of work. And sometimes you can even have some other activities like stakeholder engagement that you have as part of your work. You want to put that in also into your backlog. Sometimes you come up with some documentation, right? You can also have that in your backlog. So think of the backlog as anything and everything you do in the work. So to put it even simply, anything that is not in the backlog is not done. That's what it is. So below that, if you can see in my slide, I'm just hovering the mouse over. In Trello, you have the same concept. It's just that Trello don't use the word issue, they use the word labels, right? They've come up with labels, so you can have the same different itemization of requirements by the word labels. And we'll look at that later when I show you the demo. So at this point, I'm just gonna pause for a moment to check if everybody is okay. Just gonna ask Harvin if we have questions from the floor.
Actually, yes, we do have 2 questions so far.
Yeah, actually, I see them now.
Yep.
I do see them. Perhaps I can just take the question from one of them. What is actually the meaning of user stories? So good question. User stories, you'll see some examples later when I show you what I'm doing with Jira, but just a quick one now. Think of a user story as a requirement written from a customer point of view. For example, I would say, as a customer, I should be able to view monthly report of my sales by week so that I can understand the performance of the product over that period of time. That's an example of a user story. It's always written from the user point of view, right? The user does not have to be a customer. It can even be an internal user, but it's from that centricity, user point of view. That's why it's called user story. Good question. The next one. What about documentation required and where is it kept? Functional specification? Absolutely. So if you have those work, Jason, you've asked the question, if you have those sort of work that you're doing as part of your project, then naturally those activities and work will have to be parked as part of the project. And you may want to have that in your sprint also. For example, if you're doing some architecture work, which is important before you can even begin anything, that obviously has to come first, right? In your sprint 1. And if you have the specification documentation, like what you've said, that is probably important to get done first, then yes, you would do that in your sprint 1. Your sign-offs precisely. So the point is that you want to really be able to plan your work in minuscule forms. The idea is not to have a big bang sort of thing. The idea is to have something that you can visibly demonstrate to your client, to your stakeholders by the end of 2nd week, for example, because typically a sprint is 2 weeks long. So that is what we're looking at typically. Question from Hilton again. If sprint 1, requirement 1 unable to solve, cannot proceed to sprint 1, requirement 2. Well, that is in the assumption that there's a dependency between sprint 1 and sprint 2. So yes, there are cases where if they're tightly coupled, that means the dependency is there. You obviously cannot. but in most other cases, you find that you can do in parallel. So I hope that sort of answers most questions. Anything else I missed, Havin?
Nope, so far there's only 3.
Okay, so keep coming, guys. I mean, we'll come back with some questions in a while. Good, that's good questions. Now, let me now proceed to the demonstration proper itself, and I just wanted to take you to Trello. So let me just share my screen. Give me a second. All right. Are you able to see my screen, Havin?
Yes.
Okay, so what you're seeing here, let me just try and refresh this, is my Trello board. Let me just take you to my home page so you know what's happening. Right. So when you log into Trello, some of you have used Trello, so you're probably quite familiar by now. For the rest of you who are not familiar with Trello, at the moment you log into Trello, you'll see this. And this is where you have your workspace, and you can have a number of workspaces. Like, for example, you can have a workspace for your family project. You can have something for your friends. You can have something for your work. So you have your members of work in your workspace for work, your members in the family for your workspace for family, and so on. So that's the idea of having workspaces on the left. You can see where my mouse is, so you can create such workspaces. So I have created already something for our presentation today, and that's the PMI webinar 17 July. So what I've done here is that I have sort of put all what we're doing today. We can look at this. These are cards, right? What you see here, introduction, agile, mainstream, and all these are cards. Cards are nothing but little requirements. So I have used this presentation today, 1 hour, to reflect the timing that I would probably take for each of this, right? So we have sort of done, in fact, right up to this point. We are at this last point doing Trello now, and we're going to proceed with Jira. In fact, I deliberately missed one out. We do have a Q&A at the end, right? So let me just click on the card. I'll add Q&A. Oh, my A is missing. Okay, Q&A. That comes at the end, right? So when I add this card, it goes into that. Now, these numbers you see here are actually timing, right? I have used it to mean time. But in actual fact, when you do Agile project, these are not time. These are actually what they call as points, story points. These story points will aggregate itself to give you the scope of the project. So in this case, I would probably want to put some time here. I'll just put the bracket here so that we know about 15 minutes of time. So there you go. So I've got 15 minutes for Q&A. So in total, I have about 55 minutes on the top. Now I'm going to try and split this 55 minutes of work into 2 sprints, right? So what I'll do is I'll just move them into the backlogs. The backlog is basically what I'm going to start doing in the coming sprint. So I'm just going to equally split them up, because if you notice, the moment I drag it here, I'll see the number increasing. So I've got about 55, so that's an average of about 27, 25, so that sort of thing. So let me just try and, move that here. So you see the numbers picking up. So I've got 20 here. Let me try and put one more. All right, there you go. So it's pretty much what I'm thinking now is that for the kind of work I have for this 1 hour, we probably have just 2 sprints. Now, this is fictitious, guys, because really you need 2 weeks to demonstrate this, right? I'm just giving you the idea behind this. So you have a sprint backlog, you move some work from your product backlog, you move them into a sprint backlog, and obviously you will start doing them because I've done it. So I'm just going to move them here. Right. Now, what you can also see is that there's some people's faces here, right? And I've got Harvin here and Yenhan here as well, because they were doing introduction. For the Q&A, I probably want to do the same thing. I've not put my face there, so I know the members. I'm gonna click there and put my face over there, right? So you know now the ones who are going to work on this particular card or activity. And obviously, since I've done that, I'm just going to move it to done. Done all this already, right? There you go. Now, every time I move a card, the members of the board will receive some form of notification. I can set the notification by the day so that people don't get emails like every time I move a card. Or I may want to set it by the card. That means every time I move a card, Harvin and Yenhan gets notified. So I'm done with this right now. I'm finished. So I'm doing Trello. Trello is coming next, right? So I'm just going to say that, well, I'm done with sprint 1. So I'm just going to move this to sprint 1. So sprint 1 is sort of completed. So there you go. So ideally what happens is you're going to put the date in sprint 1, right? It's over 2 weeks. You'll have the dates in there as well. And for every card, you actually also have the start and end of those due dates. So I'm just sort of making this a bit fictitious here, but I see you get the point, right? Where you have those dates in those cards as well. Now you see that there's a little bit of a bar here in pink, right? Now you can actually start to categorize each card. Now, for example, if you click on this card and you look at the labels, you will find that I have already set some labels, right? Because Trello is a demonstration, so I've set it as demonstration. Supposing there's something else I would click, it's a risk item, it's a task, it's a story, it's a bug, it's an epic, whatever I may want to do. So this is kind of helpful because later on when you do your reporting, you can filter those reports based on those labels as well. Again, you filter those reports based on the ones that have been assigned to do the work as well. So the number of benefits there. So yes, I'm now in the next sprint backlog because I have now cleared my backlog, right? My backlog is empty, which means there's nothing else need to be done except what's on the sprint backlog. That's what it means right now. So I am doing this right now with you, right? And I'm subsequently going to do Jira demonstration and the Q&A after this. So that's what we're going to do. All right. So what's helpful in all of that is that when you eventually churn out your prediction and your charts in real time, it helps you to understand where you are at different stages of your work. So you can add on this, what I call the add-ons in Trello. You can see that, this is, I start off with 55 that was here and I finished something. And in fact, because I structured a project, you have to have it as over 2 weeks. So the end date was set as 29. So if you were to actually do this sort of work in an actual project point of view, you'll be able to see your actual timeline and progress mapped against the expected progress and timeline. So that's the benefit of having such charts churned out. So like I said, you can also have the burn up chart that tells you what you've done. Burn down tells you what's left, not done. Burn up tells you what you have done. And you can also go down by user. For example, you want to track Harvin's work, see how much he has done over how much he has left to do. You can do that. And you can also go by label. For example, you want to check progress for the requirements of user stories alone or requirements by risk alone. How is that going on? You can do all sort of drill downs, right? So I obviously can't do that now because we have not had the data in. So that is a very quick rundown of Trello for you. And I'm just going to pause for a moment for some quick questions before we move on to Jira.
We actually have a couple of questions in the chat room.
Okay, I will look at them now. Thank you, Harvin. Okay, I think Jason has asked. Okay, we'll probably go up a bit more. I'll start with Firdaus. What is the backlog? Does it mean that something has been passed? Does it mean something that has been passed, the time to complete? I'm not sure whether I got your question correctly, Firdaus. But I think what you're trying to say is this: the backlog is primarily the work that needs to be done, right? It's not past, it's in fact what needs to be done. So what you will do is that you will start to slowly move some items into the sprint backlog, the way I've done it, and then slowly work that out. And then you finish it over 2 weeks, and then you go to the next set of work that becomes sprint 2. So that's how you gradually complete all the items in the backlog. Hope that answered your question. Jason, primary difference between Jira and Trello? Well, I would say they predominantly do about the same thing. But Jira has got superior features in a sense where you're able to really drill down and give people empowerment, and you look at a lot of workflows that is customized to your organization, and a lot of automated rules that you can trigger, and you can even have little alerts that you can build into the whole process, active reminders, push notifications. So it's really very, very powerful. Whereas Trello, because it's not initially set out as a project management tool, particularly for Jira, but now that it has become part of Atlassian, you find that there are more additions, more add-ons. But I think Trello serves its own niche area because it's fast, it's quick to set up, it's not too heavy going, and I think it still has its own, people who like to use it. I'll go into Jira a bit later, and then you'll see hopefully something else, Jason. Product backlog, absolutely, Krishna. Prioritize list of requirements. That's absolutely true. Thank you for saying that. Hafiz, is for you to complete the task, is there validation? Absolutely. In fact, that's what I didn't do here. You could have one other thing. If I just want to take your attention to my screens, you could have an activity called verification. So, sorry, didn't press an enter there. Yeah, there you go. So I could move this in between done and doing, right? So this is exactly what Hafiz is asking. You could move some task once you're done, sort of completed, and get it tested in your team internally before you proclaim it as done, right? So that's verification. Can anyone move tasks from one status to the other? Is there a control mechanism? Absolutely, there has to be one, because can you imagine people just moving it as they like? You wouldn't want that to happen. So that is why Jira has more controls in place, and you can really actually dictate who, for that matter, can do that moving of those cards, right? The status, you call it. Trello has it with a bit of addition plugins, but it's not as seamless as Jira does it, right? Jira is really very good at that. So that hopefully answers your question, Thiru. Saravanan, I'm not sure what you meant by explore into Progeo, wondering whether it will suit Agile project management. You may want to clarify that a little bit before I can discuss what you were wanting to know. Korean, can some of the sprints be done in parallel rather than sequential? Absolutely. Now, but that's under the assumption that you have different teams, right? So here the assumption is that you have one project team that is working through the project. So obviously you're keeping that in mind. Prashant, can we maintain the test scripts with the release occurrence? Can we use Trello for? Yes, you can use Trello for DMS. In some cases they have, but it's not purposefully built for a DMS, if I were to add that. In fact, Atlassian has other tools like Confluence. They do a bit of, document requirements management and so on. can we test scripts with the release occurrence? You may have to integrate Trello with other test suites, not on its own. And okay, Firdaus again, we have the word backlog. Okay, yeah, so I suppose the word backlog here has been used differently in your context, so that can be a bit confusing. Sidit, you mentioned about another tool with Kanban board, can be auto-generated from Gantt chart. Yes, yes, today there are loads of tools out there, loads of things that can be done. Now, I just want to add to that because Gantt chart is actually very different from what it is, what Kanban board is all about. But yes, I agree where you're coming from. The tools that do this sort of back and forth automation. Does Trello work like a Kanban board? Yes, an absolute good Kanban board. Augustine, your question. If certain requirements pass the target due to due date, will there be auto? Yes, there'll be auto notification by emails. You can set all these rules into Trello itself. So these rules can be set. And in fact, if you know a particular card is very high in its priority and complexity, you want that to be tracked individually, you can add additional rules for those cards, especially. Who own these cards? You may have the card owner, so to speak. And if you notice here, the name that is assigned to this card, the picture, those are the owners of it. So good question, guys. So I hope we'll see something a bit now when we experiment and look at Jira per se, right? Let's get into Jira in the interest of time. So in the first instance, what's happening is, you know, when you create a project on Jira, right, it gets you to the screen. Now, this is what I love about Jira. It already has the know-how of different industry verticals. And if you're doing service management, work management, marketing, human resource, they have done their homework and they have mapped out more or less similar things that you would expect from those industries like finance, design. So Agile is really not limited to IT alone, as you would have guessed by now. In fact, the company that I'm talking to and doing work now with, Philip Morris, they're absolutely doing it for a non-IT area. So it's really about the Agile way of working, right? That's really the spirit of things. So, like for example, in software development, if I were to take you know, Kanban, for example, right? So we notice, you know, you have issue types. Issue types are basically requirements, right? We talked about this earlier. So you can either have an epic, a story, a bug. So that does not mean you can't add more issue types. You can, but these are the default ones. And you start using the template, you are brought to the screen, right? And you have what we call as a team managed or company managed. Now, company managed is interesting because you really want people to follow a particular standard that the PMO has set. So you want it to be a company managed project. You've got the certain standards, you've got certain roles, certain naming conventions. You know, some companies don't use the word, some agile companies don't use the word project manager, for example. They use the word project lead because project manager seems very, you know, dictated. So they don't want that word. So whatever it may be, you can set all that roles in a company managed project. Whereas a team managed one can be a bit free and easy. You know, you can just create your own. You want to have it experimented within your team. So they also have a provision for that. Now, I wouldn't go and click it because I've already created something that I want to share with you. Now, this is actually a project, a live project for that matter. I just want to share with you what's currently happening. So this project, as you can see, you know, it ranges from somewhere in July. It goes right up to, you notice, sometime in September. It's about a year now. So the various features that's being mapped out. And this is what you look at, what we call as a roadmap. A roadmap is the high-level inscription of high-level features, right? If you click on each, you will see the breakdown, what's happening within that, right? So I've mapped it very well. And once you have the roadmap, obviously you can create the backlog, right? The backlog is nothing but a list of all the requirements, right? So there are a number of requirements in this project, and these requirements are already in a coming active sprint. And if I were to click on this active sprint, these are what's going to happen come end of the month. So this sprint, well, not end of the month, actually in 20 days time, it's supposed to begin in 2nd August and end in 16. So that's about 2 weeks. That's a 2-week sprint. And I'm looking at these requirements completed, right? Now, if I were to add a new requirement, let's say I decided to come up with, I need to come up with an architecture document. So I can create a new requirement. So I call it a documentation. That's fine. Already there. So I call it, okay, I'll call it an architecture of the document. And I start creating it. And bang, you see it's coming up here, right? Now, obviously, this is movable. You can move them up and down because what you move up means higher priority, right? So I have my first sprint, but perhaps I want to start planning my next sprint. Is that possible? Yes, it's possible, because you may want to plan 1 or 2 sprints in advance so that you can meet your release targets, right? So what you do is to just use this and just move up. And usually you want to do what's on the top of the backlog, right? So you just have to move it downwards like that. Okay, let's say I'm just saying, okay, let's just try and get this done. But typically it's not so simple as just moving it up, down, up and down, right? You need to understand the team's velocity, the capacity, the capability, and work that out, calculate it, and then articulate that to the story points, and then decide how many story points you can consume in a coming sprint. So I'm sorry, I'm throwing some jargons here, but I just want to impress upon you that it's not just dragging this up and down. So that's really what it is. So I've got 2 sprints now. I've got sprint 1, sprint 2. Brilliant, right? And obviously over time, I can also look at my reports, right? I can churn loads of very, very powerful, clever reports. And it's very, very useful. And I can even create my customized reporting as well. That's possible. And there's something else I want to show you. That's something we call as a release. Now, remember, after you finish a sprint, you may not want to demo that to the client, right? You might want to wait for a few sprints to finish. So here in my project, in this live project, I have said that by the end of 30th November, I'm going to release about 2 or 3 sprints completed. This work is going to be released to the customer. The customer now gets to see this outcome. So that's the word release. And another release is coming in December, because you don't want to really release every 2 weeks, because it's not substantial enough for the customer to see value in it, right? So that's the idea. So that's pretty much what I want to share with you with regards to Jira. And there's really loads of stuff that I can really do and share, but we really don't have the time to decipher those stuff right now. But let me just get back to where we stopped in the slide. Just a couple of more stuff to go before we end the presentation. Now, to understand Jira, right? You've got someone asked, why is Jira more powerful? And you can see that here. You've got the administrator, you've got the project administrator. So if you are a project lead, you would probably assume the role as a project administrator in Jira. And if you're part of the PMO office, you will have that Jira administration role, right? You can set the standards for the entire project and all the projects in the company. You can do that, right? And if you're looking at a full-blown Jira configuration, now what I've shown you was just a glimpse. In fact, what I like Jira the most is that as project leads, I know some of us here are program managers, right? We can actually have multiple boards, multiple projects configured in one board for us to see in a snapshot. It's absolutely interesting for that. And you can have different stakeholders see different things. For example, if I'm the customer, I just want to know how many stories are done and what are those and not done. That's it. Don't give me other details. You can have those different boards for different stakeholders. Testers want to see just the bug requirements and stuff like that. Developers just want to see the user stories, right? Those policy makers want to see something else. So You actually allow everybody to get into your Jira space. And that's the whole idea. You want everybody to come together to have this common visibility of everything they do as part of the project. And yes, you have Java query language where you can do some intelligent queries and stuff like that and come up with very customized reports. So yes, I've pretty much come to the end. I thought just to reinforce our understanding, let's have a quick poll. Just to cement, I know I've said a lot of things and hopefully it's not too much for you. And let's see if this poll can help crystallize some ideas moving forward. I'm just going to launch the poll now. Just 3 questions. If you can quickly answer them. Let's take about 2 minutes. Okay, let's take another 30 seconds. Okay, another 10 seconds. Okay, I see most of you have answered. Almost 90% has answered. So let's look at everybody's answers now. And let's share the results. For the first one, so most of you got it right, absolutely. You've got the product vision first, the roadmap, and the backlog. So that's the right answer. For the second question, the answer is actually C, the third one. Your product backlog contains all requirements, your project requirements and the product requirements. The project requirement is what you need to do as part of the project, and the product requirements are the features that you need to come up with, right? So it's got everything in the product backlog. If you remember, I said anything and everything you need to do is in the backlog. If it's not in the backlog, it's not done. So backlog is, in other words, a scope document, right? It tells you basically that. And the last one, yes, most of you got that correct. Jira has advanced features. As a matter of fact, both Jira and Atlassian does have a free plan, right? You can actually have all the features of Jira and Atlassian for free. In Jira, you need obviously 10 people maximum for a free plan. Anything more than 10, you need to get into the paid version. But the free version has one limitation. It doesn't have advanced permission controls. But if you're fine with that, then you can absolutely use Jira for free in most instances. So that sort of wraps up the session. We have broadly covered a number of areas today, from Agile, why and how, towards Agile tools, global trends, use cases, followed by Agile project management, the big picture, understanding the vision, product roadmap, product backlog, and we wrapped up with an overview of Trello and Jira demonstration. So with that, I'd like to thank you for listening. It's been a pleasure being here. If you have benefited from this session in any way, I think I'll be happy and grateful. Thank you very much.
Cool. A round of applause virtually to Dr. Sanat for his presentation.